So cool. You're obviously running for something. What are you running for?
I'm running for the Winter Springs City Commission.
Okay.
Winter Springs is a city in Seminole County in Florida, in Central Florida. We're north of Orlando, just to kind of give you a geographical location here. But I'm running for the Winter Springs City Commission, District 1. There's citywide elections. So, and what I mean with citywide is everybody votes, even though we are single member districts. And I'm in District 1, which is Southwest Winter Springs. Winter Springs kind of is divided into two parts. You got 3 commissioners on the east side, 2 commissioners on the west side, and that makes up the geographic boundaries.
Awesome. So, city commission. I'm guessing your election's coming up in a couple weeks. Is that right?
Actually, November.
Okay, so it's in November. So the primary.
We're on the November ballot.
Okay, good.
And one of the important things that comes with that is obviously we do have some primary elections still going on in the county. We do have some competitive races for school board and supervisor of elections. But the focus really has been on November in our town, just because of how many issues have been popping up, within our city. So quite frankly, Winter Springs is quite engaged right now in what its political future is.
That's good. That's really exciting to hear that people are actually taking that into consideration, taking some care. So obviously it is an election year. So 2024, the big election. You're running in the city commission area. So if you can share with the voters who are maybe stumble onto this video that are curious, what is Mr. Paul Diaz running for? I mean, what is he running on? How would you maybe break down your top 1 priority for the city if you were to be elected?
Well, I mean, I guess overall, I'm running for the Winter Springs City Commission because I believe our community deserves proactive, transparent leadership that can address our most pressing needs. They're going to be infrastructure needs, financial management, and public safety. You see, what happens is over the years, critical issues like the stormwater systems, the wastewater systems, and especially, and near and dear to my heart, financial oversight have been neglected or merely patched up rather than receiving the comprehensive attention they deserve. So one of my goals is to move beyond these short-term fixes and focus on more long-term solutions that will benefit Winter Springs for generations to come. The financial matters alone will probably solve most of everything, but unfortunately, we have to address each one individually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and financial aspect of everything is pretty much the root anywhere. So, I mean, of course, wastewater infrastructure, economic development, public safety, fiscal responsibility. And for the voters who are very curious, pauldiaz.com is going to be the link to his website. And I'll leave it in the post. So feel free to follow it if you would like to. So do you know, I'm guessing you're on the outside, so you don't actually know the exact budgets, the way that the money is being spent in the city. But do you perceive from the outside any low-hanging fruit that you would say, hey, I want to look at this. I think we can save money here, and we can use that to improve our wastewater infrastructure?
Actually, I'll take it a step further.
Okay.
What happens is this, and just to give you perspective, my qualifications are actually rooted in both my professional background and my community involvement. I'm an IRS enrolled agent, and I'm the owner of the Tax Cutter. It's a tax resolution, planning, and preparation firm, and I deeply understand fiscal responsibility and financial management. My MBA is in accounting, my undergraduate degree is in finance. So that's equipped me with the skills to analyze complex financial data and make informed decisions that benefit the entire community. The fiscal 25 budget just came out recently. I did do a deep dive into that budget. Unfortunately, some of the supporting documents, or if you will, the work papers that come into that budget were not available because the city not only is late, has negligently not even submitted an audited budget or audited figures for the previous year. In other words, where this money is actually, coming from and where it needs to go. What happens is, in addition, the fiscal matters per se, and let me use wastewater as an example. If you take the fiscal 2025 budget, and I don't mean to get too wonky, but let's just go ahead and extrapolate data. Every year for the last decade, they've spent money, but let's just use 5 years for the sake of argument. If you take the fiscal year 25 budget and go backwards for 5 years, they've already spent more than $100 million on water, if you will, wastewater, stormwater, without legitimately having a shovel in the ground. So if you take that same number and extrapolate that 10 years forward, and we go with a very conservative 3% compounding rate of increase over the years, you will have already spent over the last 5 and next 10 years, so in a 15-year block of time, you will have spent close to $180 million. It's about $177 million when you compound on wastewater and water issues in general in Winter Springs without actually having rebuilt either of the two failing ancient ancient wastewater plants. So what happens is this: someone needs to come in and just say, we're going to get it done. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
we've already been patching this. And I sometimes laugh because it's kind of like one of those Flex Seal commercials where they just get and slap on the Flex
Yeah.
Seal and that's it. We're done. The wastewater plant won't blow up. But what happens is this, and just to kind of give you a little bit of perspective, back in the 1970s, one of the wastewater plants was put together. It was actually put together as a temporary wastewater plant for the sole purpose of the developer being able to sell the home sites in the area that was being built. It was really only meant to be there for about 5 years or so. Once the city structure took over the development and took over the utilities, the city was supposed to go ahead and build one. That would have been back in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that plant is still operating today. It's not
Wow.
operating at its necessary capacity, and it's been patched up and patched up and patched up over the years. So what has ended up happening is that the aging infrastructure, and this is just one plant. There's a second plant that has a completely different set of problems. That one actually had a pipe explode, which caused a major fish kill. So we're talking about, lives are at stake because if someone would have been standing where that pipe blew up, they would have died. I mean, it would have been a horrific, death. So this isn't just millions of gallons of wastewater spilling, in the city. We're talking about an environmental disaster that could happen just because we've continued to kick the can down the road. The money is there. The budget includes money to be able to get this done. You're going to have some federal intervention, some state intervention, some county intervention. But here's what's important: the city has to have the relationship with all of these stakeholders, the stakeholders in the community, the HOAs, the landowners, as well as the businesses in the area, the homeowners. They also have to have the relationships with the county commissioners, the county government. They have to have the relationship with the state officials as well, both at the cabinet level and at the legislative level, and then of course our congressional representatives to be able to bring in the necessary money. Just recently, our congressman was able to get through the Defense Authorization Act money that came in for water issues to all of the other neighboring cities. Winter Springs was not in that appropriation. Why? Because the relationships aren't there. We have to rebuild these relationships. One of the most pressing challenges that Winter Springs has is securing the necessary votes on the commission to move important projects forward, especially in areas like stormwater and wastewater, which we're talking about, but in financial management as well. And for way too long, the approach has been to just continue to patch up these problems and defer action. It's the proverbial kick the can down the road strategy. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm committed to changing that narrative. I want to be able to work collaboratively with fellow commissioners, prioritize and implement sustainable solutions, not only in our city hall, but also at the county and state level. All the detailed reports on the infrastructure needs are already available. The city over the last 10 years has spent millions of dollars on reports. We have one engineering report after another. We have engineering reports for the engineering reports.
Wow.
That's how crazy this has gotten. And then all they do is, okay, well, what do we need to do to patch it up now for the next, couple years and couple cycles and what have you? Well, in that process, decades have now come through and we haven't solved it. When the wastewater issue first came up more than a decade ago, it was a $35 million problem. Some of the reports came in a few years later, it was already up to a $50 million problem. Then a few years after that, it became like a $70 million problem. Well, now we're looking at significantly more than $100 million worth of wastewater, rebuilding. And once you add stormwater and everything else, you're talking about 160 to $180 million that has to be expended. Well, guess what? It's got to get done. We need to get a shovel on the ground, and I plan to get that done.
Yeah. Well, the numbers are exasperating to me just thinking about it, because you're a numbers guy. Obviously, I'm a numbers guy as well. I deal with numbers all the time. And so the taxpayer, of course, is the one that's going to be footing the bill. It's not a magical city has the money to do this. So
That's
just
correct.
based on the numbers that you have provided me, and I did a quick Google search, about 40,000 people in Winter Springs.
That's correct.
So with that amount of money required in repairs is about $2,500 per person that lives in Winter Springs to fix just the wastewater. Not even talking about the roads, not even talking about the roads. I mean, the bridges, the fresh water, all that other stuff. So at some point, somebody has to take a look at this and say, hey, this is unsustainable. I mean, if I'm looking at $2,500, then where's that money coming from? Like, you can't allocate all of the sales tax, all of the property tax just to continue patching this problem and kicking the can down the road. It doesn't seem logically feasible. So, like, would you be that person to say, hey, let's take a look at this? I have an idea. This is how we're going to do it on, I guess, the first month, 3 months into office?
And yes, and let me address that because this is extremely important, and it's a Florida wide issue, and it is a national issue. But let me just stay within Florida for a minute. What happens is this: affordability is not just your property tax. Affordability is also your principal and interest, which is what animates everybody when you're having the conversation of somebody buying a house. But the principal and interest is minimal compared to the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, and especially the insurance. Obviously, right now, while we're recording this, a Category 1 hurricane is hitting the Big Bend of
Right.
Florida. So what happens is this: is that as the storms get more and more frequent and violent, you're going to have situations where the infrastructure, you either fix it up front and get it operating for the future and for the storm that will come, versus a reactive, hey, let's fix it after it's done. What happens is this, and this has happened to many municipalities throughout the country. During the COVID era, a lot of money was sloshing around, the state and local governments. So what happens is a lot of that money that hasn't even been spent yet, in many cases, is still out there. So cities were able to get by because they had all this other free money coming in that was above and beyond, the property taxes and what have you that comes in. Then you had situations where, for example, when we had some storms a couple of years ago here, it washed out roads, it washed out bridges. Well, then FEMA money and federal money came in. So again, that was able to patch things up. The county was involved, the state was involved, the federal government was involved. So money started coming in. Yet we still have bridges that have not been properly fixed and repaired to where they need to be. Again, for the storm that's going to come, not
Mm-hmm.
the one that already came. See, and that's the challenge that we have, because as we start looking at other issues in Central Florida. So, for example, right now in Florida, there's a ballot initiative to increase the homestead exemption again, or I'm sorry, to just increase in addition to the current homestead exemption. Um, so that will inevitably, you know, challenge revenues on the way in. There is a 1 cent sales tax for infrastructure that that was passed at the county level, and it has been reset several times, but it's coming up for resetting again. If that were to fail, that's now another source of revenue that is missing. The reason the city's not sweating it is because there's still a good year and a half of penny sales tax money, as it's called, that still has been allocated but not spent, meaning the city could potentially kick the can down the road again. So you see how the fiscal issues kind of all come together. It's a numbers issue to solve these problems. Well, what ends up happening is, what happens 18 months from now or 2 years from now when that revenue is not there? So what happens is, barring a situation where we might have a fiscal crisis in the country that could potentially drop property values. I mean, talk about a perfect storm, no pun intended,
Mm-hmm.
of issues that can affect the city. You have to have people in place that can understand these issues. Serious problems require serious people. My campaign's motto is bringing order to chaos, because right now, when the financial house is in chaos, when City Hall is in chaos, when all you have is arguing back and forth, and you can't even get simple programs through the city commission, then at that point, someone has to come in, step in, and say, "We're going to bring again order to chaos." Serious
Mhm.
people require, serious people are required when there are serious problems at stake. And right now, we have serious problems. We are there. The moment has come. And as a city, we need to come together and say, okay, let's go ahead and put in, because right now we've got 3 seats up out of the 5 in the commission. Let's go ahead and put the 3 absolutely most qualified people there that can understand the fiscal concerns the city has, are committed to solving the wastewater problem, committed to dealing with the stormwater issues, and actually get a shovel in the ground. Bulldozers actually operating,
Mhm.
not, well, let's just patch this up with some Flex Seal for another, couple years.
Yeah, and you're bringing up something so important that I don't think many people are really attuned to, and I don't really blame them because, like, as a society, as a culture, we're not really taught how to do this. But what I'm hearing from you is that the commission, even the state of Florida as a whole, seems to be operating in a reactive sense rather than a proactive sense. And being in business myself, I know how important it is to be proactive and anticipate problems that are going to happen in the future. Even to the point where you're talking about like cash flow issues too, where there's still 18 months worth of funds coming in. So from like a base level perception, somebody could actually think there's plenty of money available, and they'll make decisions as if there's plenty of money available. But the reason that many businesses go under is because they don't understand how cash flow works. So 3, 6, 9 months down the road, the money and decisions that were made 9 months prior start to actually show the fruits of their efforts in 9 months. So if we spend like there's no tomorrow today, we'll see that effect in 9 months. And then we have to wait 9 months for the solution to actually be implemented. So all these decisions have to be done proactively and anticipating something that is going to inevitably happen in the future. Of course, we're not going to make a decision for something that'll never happen. But I don't know if you remember 2017, we had a hurricane here in Houston called Hurricane Harvey.
Absolutely.
And that's what was considered, I think, a 100-year flood. So it's going to happen once every 100 years, just according to the name 100-year flood. So we should plan for it happening again in the next 100 years. So that's,
That is correct.
of course, it was reactive, but we also had to be proactive as well.
Sure. And you know what? Look, and Texas is a good example of for example, setting up those storm walls, if you will, like in Galveston and things like that are engineering feats. And what happens is this: the technology is there for us to be able to solve these problems, and also be thinking 50 and 100 years into the future versus 2 and 5 years in the future. And like I mentioned earlier, I mean, the financial management issues always animate me a little bit more. And when I guess when you go through graduate school in business, and specifically accounting, which is kind of the language of business, you start hearing certain terms of art, and you start learning certain terms of art that you know are always in the back of your mind when you're analyzing something. And recently, it was brought to my attention that there was a public records request to the city to get get records of the internal controls that the city has in place for its financial management. Now, our city has gone through, just every year, an exodus of call it a brain drain, if you will, an exodus of employees with institutional knowledge. Now, a lot of it is because the city did have a period of time where basically there was a level of mismanagement, if you will. And I'm not saying that anything is illegal. I'm just saying that with government accounting, you could move things around certain ways that you would not be able to get away with in the private sector.
Yep.
And what happens is there was a lot of moves, if you will, and money was being taken from different accounts, if you will, to create other problems, or to solve a problem while creating another problem. In other words, the take from Peter to pay Paul kind of idea.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing: I've never been in a retail establishment, but if you right now dropped me at a local retail store and said, "All right, Paul, here you go. You're managing it. Go." Well, at that point, I'm going to have to get and say, okay, what do I know about marketing, management, accounting, finance, CIS, everything that you learn in business school, and say, okay, first things first, it's a retail establishment. What are our internal controls? How do we take care of our inventory? How do we know how much we have in the back in the stock room? How much do we know we have on the shelves? And if something is missing, how do we go find it and figure out why that inventory is there? How much spillage? How much wasted? How much do we have that is going out the door in somebody's pocket with a 5-finger discount? What is going on with that? So those are internal controls. How do we how do we deal with the cash register? All right, how do we count it at night? How much did we start with? How much did we finish? Are we over? Are we under? Those are all internal controls. If we have to have accounts payable, how are those accounts payable dealt with? If it's accounts receivables, what do we do when we receive it? In other words, things as simple as a check arrived at City Hall. What do you do? Because realistically, if I showed up today and with a check, just made out a check to City of Winter Springs, not for utilities, because utilities is an enterprise, so that's a separate fund altogether. If I just showed up with a check to the City of Winter Springs, I would like to know what the life cycle of that check is. Well, if you don't have internal controls, you cannot say the check is received. It is put into a log. In that log, it is stamped. Once it's stamped, then it is put into a bag. That bag goes to the bank at 5 o'clock every day. Those are procedures, standard operating procedures. If wastewater doesn't frighten you and a stormwater catastrophe doesn't frighten you, the fact that the city has said in a public records request that they do not have documents for the internal controls that they use for the entire finance process should absolutely keep residents up at night. Literally.
Yeah, I would absolutely question a lot of that. Like, I can't accuse foul play, but if there was foul play to happen, that would be a wide open opportunity for somebody with bad intent to take advantage of an exploit. So, just for the sake of transparency, I mean, the taxpayer deserves accountability and transparency from their city, any given place. So, I want to ask you a question though, because you're very intelligent. It's obvious you're very intelligent when it comes to finances with data and sequences. So, I love the way that you think in that sense, because any business would survive and thrive with somebody of that caliber of mentality being in an executive level position. So the challenge now is we're in 2024. Well, I don't know if it's a challenge as much, but are people really even considering using technology like AI to assist with government level operations? Like, I mean, I don't know if that's a scary thing or if that's like not possible. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm glad you asked that because that's actually a really good question. Here's the thing. You've got two camps in, I guess, our country or the world with AI. You have the ones that are scared that the robots are going to take over and somehow you're going to have like Terminator walking down the street. And then you have those that say, wait a second, this is a technology that can help me be more productive. Okay. I'm in the latter camp. Let me tell you why. Because there was a time, and here, let me just use, the tax industry as an example. There was a time when a tax return was done with a pencil on a piece of paper and it was handwritten. Then tax software came in, and tax software got better and better and better over time. Eventually, you didn't have to necessarily know all the forms. You just kind of had to know that a form was there, and the tax
Yeah.
software would have it in a menu. And then now the tax software will suggest, hey, by the way, you're going to need this other form. So you might have to report income on an individual income tax return 3 or 4 different places on a tax return. Well, this tax software starts guiding you through that. That is progress. In other words, instead of spending 2 hours doing that one process, it might have taken 1 hour, which means that my productivity can go up by having that extra hour to use. Unfortunately, you have to understand that in many cases, it's not the number of employees on a payroll. As it is right now, the city's payroll is incomprehensible because cities with more employees have a smaller payroll run than Winter Springs does. Just look at it that way. And I'm talking about 7 municipalities in Seminole County, and I've looked at their payrolls, and many of them even have their own fire department where we outsource that to the county, and many of them have other processes that would cost more money, if you will, and their payrolls are comparable then to ours, even though they have more services. What happens is this, and let me go back to the AI as an example. If I could make each employee more productive, in essence, what I'm doing is I'm generating more product, if you will, for the service for the city, making it less expensive for the taxpayer to maintain that role. In other words, more can be done with less. And it doesn't necessarily mean less people. Really, time in and of itself, because it's not a renewable resource. I
Mm-hmm.
can't get and say, well, I saved a minute here. I'm going to go ahead and pull it next week when when a minute is necessary for something else. That's not the way time works. Because basically, it's how much more could I get done in that 9 to 5, for the citizens and residents of Winter Springs. So I'm glad you brought that up, because technology is going to be one of the main driving factors in lowering overall costs, making the city more productive, and going back even to financial oversight. It doesn't then require an entire room of bookkeepers. What it requires is a room of folks that can manage all of these operations at a higher level. In other words, you bring in the folks that can handle a higher level of responsibility versus I've got a lot of people doing, smaller tasks. Yeah, technology is something that our city needs to be looking at. We have a lot of processes in the city that are, they're still rooted in 20 years ago technology
Mm-hmm.
that we need to, obviously improve.
Yeah, and that's something that I've noticed a lot too. And I don't know if it's as much of a fear of the unknown as much as it is just a high number of top level turnover, obviously elected roles, so they can change over time. But I remember in 2008 when I was going to get my driver's license at I forgot where it was, the county, not the county clerk. It wasn't a driver's license, something with the car. So I had to go to the county clerk, and I saw their computer there, and this is 2008. The monitor was that black and green text monitor. So that was from like the 80s, 90s. So if government is operating at a 20-year delay from the private sector, maybe even more, then that alone is the lowest hanging fruit to kind of re-optimize and enhance what is available at our fingertips. Because right now, I can tell you from the private sector, AI has done at least 30 to 40% of my job for me in the last 1 year, which, like you mentioned, allowed me to directly use that energy into something else. It's not like I'm working 40% less. It's just that 40% of that job is being outsourced to this machine. And now that time and energy is available for scaling even further and pushing the boundaries of what is possible. So
Sure,
imagine if the
that's
city was
absolutely
able,
correct.
yeah. Yeah, imagine if the city is
Absolutely.
able to do that. And for the taxpayer and for the voters who are curious about this, like it's very interesting, but it's also mostly what I've heard from candidates that get pushback from the voters. It's really a fear of the unknown. So,
And you know what? And here, that's a good segue for the higher level issue. The issue itself is not, for example, AI or new technologies. The issue is leadership. And let me put it this way, because this is probably an easier way to quantify or visualize this. When I was first approached to run for the city commission, I said, okay, well, let me do my research. And I went ahead and I said, okay, let's plug and play. Let's go look up what the actual city's vision is. Let's look at what other candidates and sitting commissioners have put out. And let's go ahead and see if I can plug and play into somebody's vision. And then from there, make it my own. And, typical, good artists create, great artists steal, right? So I was going to go ahead and say, okay, let's get the best ideas. There's 5 commissioners up there. Let me get all of the best practices from them and create a candidate based on all the best practices. Let's go ahead and say, look, this is a unifying factor for this commissioner, this commissioner. And then that starts bringing, the commission together, right? Do you know what I first realized?
mm,
There was no vision for the city. Literally no vision. I have sat down with leaders in the area and said, do you know what Winter Springs vision is? And I'm like, no, we really actually don't know. And then I went ahead and I said, okay, let me just go ahead and look up every 2 years. You've got all the political ads. So I went into the, Wayback Machine, if you will, and started looking up all of the political ads from the incumbents, from those that ran against incumbents 2 years ago and won, those that have then run and won and lost as well. And all I realized that Winter Springs was doing was every candidate just had check marks,
mm-hmm.
and a check mark was, transparency, safety, and it's like, okay, well, you want safety. Well, we all want safety. I mean, okay. What do you mean you want safety? And I mean, my background alone, and professional experience, and even my involvement in the community, and let me use an example. I'm the president elect of the Rotary Club of Winter Springs. So obviously it's a service organization. So I get a front row seat, if you will, in Winter Springs on service projects that are important to the community. I'm also a member of the South Seminole Masonic Lodge. So, the Masons are one of the biggest philanthropies and charities and community organizations in the world. So obviously there I get a front row seat also as to what, needs are out in the community and here in South Seminole. I sit on the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee in Winter Springs, and I get to hear from other folks that extensively use the parks as to what it is that they expect from, for example, those parks and what that would look like. In other words, back to vision. Okay. I'm engaged with the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Winter Springs Police Department. So I get to hear from the command staff every single month, right from them, face to face in a live meeting, what the public safety issues are for the city. I also serve as the campaign treasurer for our sheriff, Dennis Lima, who now in the 2024 election cycle, and he was just reelected unopposed because of the great job he's done, in public safety in our county. Well, I understand these issues with a deep appreciation for the city's needs and the importance for strong and committed leadership. And leadership requires sometimes going out and taking those arrows. I
Mm-hmm.
joke around with HOA presidents when I meet with them. I'm like, hey, listen, sometimes I'm going to have to make a tough decision and take a tough vote. We may not always agree. But Reagan used to say that my 80% friend is not my 20% enemy. Okay. We may disagree on 20% of things, but that means that the other 80%, we can actually work together. And if we work together on that other 80%, here's the way I look at it. And maybe it's oversimplistic. Maybe I'm going to get in and 4 years later, getting beat up as a commissioner, I'm going to say, no, my 20% enemy is my enemy. No, maybe I'll do it that way. But right now, let me have my vision where I think to myself this. If we work on the projects we agree on, what's going to happen is we're going to start collaborating and building relationships. And one of the things they teach you in business school is collaborating and working with others. So even when you have to do like capstone projects and stuff, you're working with other people. Some are better writers. Some are better speakers. Some are better at finance. Some are better at accounting. Some are better at marketing. Some are better at management. Well, the guy with the management background and the guy with the marketing background, we got to bring them together because those are two different groups. The finance and the accounting people, they have to look at, the ratios the way that they do. So in other words, people have to come together and collaborate. I'm of the school of thought that if we start collaborating together, we start building relationships, which means that we start working on that 80%. Chances are very good that 4 years from now, when the term is over, we may have never even gotten to the 20% that we didn't agree on because we were working so much on the 80% that we do agree on. And what happens is many of those issues that we disagree on might even drop off because they're no longer issues, or they'll solve themselves because we were solving other things. Just like I go back to the financial management issues will solve wastewater and stormwater, because ultimately it's going to take a financial leadership to say, what does it take to get in the next 90 days, 180 days, within the next year, a shovel in the ground and a bulldozer, operating to get it done. In the West wastewater plant, we have a completely different issue because there's land that has to be acquired by the city to be able to actually build the new wastewater plant and work with what we have because of the weird, pie-shaped lot that the current wastewater plant is in. Well, guess
Mm-hmm.
what? The city does not then go ahead and proactively work with the landowner, work with the community, work with the HOAs, work with the businesses in the area to get and say, this is the solution that we need. It's a fight. And you can't constantly be in a fight with your own residents, with your own businesses, and with the landowners that have the land that you need, for example, for a wastewater plant. If not, that wastewater plant would have probably been already started years ago but for the acquisition of the land. Well, you need folks in there that can understand what land acquisition looks like, what it's going to take to purchase it, finance it, deal with it, and get it to, to a final step, to signatures, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I want to frame this next question for you in a particular way, because everything that I've heard so far is intellectually sound. You have talked nothing but policy. You've talked nothing but how to move forward and progress. And you haven't mentioned, in a good way, you haven't mentioned anything about any negative characteristics of other previous commissioners or existing commissioners. So I have full confidence that if somebody actually listened to this entire interview, they would no doubt be swayed to vote for you just because of how well you've been able to articulate the issues and present the solutions. My challenging question for you is, what are the messages of maybe your opponents that you would be up against in order to kind of challenge the voter? Yeah, that sounds good on paper, because I've heard candidates talk about platitudes all the time, like you mentioned, transparency, accountability. Well, everybody says that on their platform. How do you actually propose to do it? So what separates you from, like, if a voter has 1 minute to hear your opponent or opponents and you, how would you kind of sway them to be like, no, I'm the best candidate here?
I'll tell you realistically. Let me take a deep breath as I say it, because it was a little bit shocking. Within 72 hours of me filing to run for the seat, my opponent and their surrogates, through fake profiles online and their surrogates, which are loud in our community, immediately started attacking me personally. Not one attack has been on my policies or on what I think the vision should be for Winter Springs, how we solve wastewater, stormwater, and the financial oversight that the city needs. It was all literally personal on me. They attacked my wife. They attacked my son. They attacked my business. Basically, it was an all-out attack. That is all that the city has as far as its incumbents to run on. What was my crime? I had the audacity to say, I think there's a better way, and it's going to take serious people to solve serious problems. Why should someone vote for me? I'll tell you why. At the end of the day, you need people in the city commission that can make the tough decisions. Unfortunately, many of the commissioners on the commission now, some of the ones that were defeated 2 years ago, basically served as puppets for each other, if you will. My opponent is an incumbent. He basically is a rubber stamp for an administration that is basically on its way out. He's actually one of the least folks that speaks in the commission. He's piped up a little bit more recently in the last month or so because I'm running. But otherwise, nobody has seen him for the last 4 years. When I started campaigning, going out and meeting with elected officials, going around the county, going around the city, folks would ask me, who are you running against?
Oh, wow.
Then I'd say the name of the commissioner. And they'd say, who? Never heard of him. I'm like, well, it sits all the way over. Couldn't tell you who it is. I mean, when residents of the city and other elected officials don't even know who another elected is, that means that the relationships aren't there. You see, now over the last month or so, not only have I met a lot of the other electeds, but guess what? I've actually been able to sit down with them, break bread, if you will. We've had lunch, we've had dinner, we've met at places. Those relationships are being built. That means that down the line, when something tough is happening in Winter Springs, I'm going to be able to go ahead and pick up the phone and say, hey, Commissioner so-and-so, hey, Representative so-and-so, hey, Senator so-and-so, we've got this issue. And Ken Blanchard, and I guess I'm old school management from that point of view. Ken Blanchard has a line that he used in one of his books that says, none of us is as smart as all of us. And what happens is this. There are best practices out there, and there are people who know a lot and a lot more than me. And I know that if I could reach out to those folks and say, hey, if you were in my seat, how would we do this? And I can ask 2 or 3 people and get the best of each one of them and come up with a consensus, and then go back to my commission and talk to the other 4 commissioners and say, hey, I've been going around town trying to figure this problem out. So why should somebody support me? Because I'm willing to pick up the phone and not further embarrass the city by not knowing what the actual hard issues are. by bringing that order to the chaos and actually building those relationships.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate everything that you've mentioned so far, and it's very intellectually and easy to digest information that you're putting out. So, like I said, if I have no doubt that a voter, if they listen to at least 5, 10, 15 minutes of this interview, it'll be very easy for them to make the decision to vote for you. And maybe even one question people can ask themselves is, what have they gotten out of the last 4 years? It's very often that I hear candidates would go canvassing, and the person who opens the door is like, wow, you're the only person that's ever actually come knocked on my door. I don't even know who you're running against. So it's a common thing. And unfortunately, that is what happens with, I guess, incumbents. Not negative or positive about the person or their campaign. It's just they're already on the seat and they have 95% incumbent advantage. So it's like, it's kind of how the game is really played. But yeah, so if you could leave the voters with one thing, and if this is the only thing that they hear about you, what would you say?
Winter Springs is at a crossroads. We have to make very tough decisions over the next 4 years. I'm willing to make those tough decisions. I'm willing to bring order to the chaos that has been plaguing the city, and I plan to get a shovel in the ground. We're going to solve wastewater. We're going to solve stormwater, and 4 years from now, we're going to be able to get and say, you know what? We're there. We're moving forward. We are actually not spending money patching things. We are actually solving the problems. And within the next 4 years, the financial oversight and internal controls in the city will be in place, and we will have an actual financially operating city that will actually be the envy and the pride of Seminole County.
Awesome. So again, I appreciate everything that we talked about today. If you're voting and you're in Winter Springs, I hope this interview has helped you make a very good decision on who you're going to select or who you're going to elect into office. At the end of the day, it's important for all of us to make decisions based on who we think is the best candidate, not based on frivolous things like party affiliation or anything like that. Well, I wouldn't say frivolous, but of course, like that does impact some people. They see a D or an R next to the name and they vote for that person without actually understanding what is going to happen in the next term by making that decision. So with all that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. And sir, it was awesome having you on. I really appreciate you joining us today.
No, thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me, and I'm looking forward to getting things done here in Winter Springs, and definitely with new leadership, it's going to get done.
Yeah, awesome. So with all that being said, see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.